Well, actually, we're real surprised at going real smoothly for our first day. Uh, I'd like to say this, that no other city in the United States is operating under a collection system like this one. This is a unique experiment, I should say, or a unique system, and no other city offers their citizens the opportunity to select the type of service they want. So this being the first day, naturally we expected some problems. But we're real pleased that we didn't get that many calls that we thought we would get. Now, there were some people who, for reasons we don't know, did not send a card back telling us which type of service they wanted. We didn't want to charge them the top rate of $3.50, so we couldn't call them all. We had 20,000 cards that were not returned, so we just assumed that they wanted to curb the lower rate. And now we are getting some calls from people who may have wanted the collector carry out but did not return a card, but we're making changes and including them in the next day.
It is in that spirit that I announce today that I am seriously considering running for the Republican nomination for governor. At the moment, I have been heartened by recent private polls that show real promise both for the Republican nomination as well as the general election. During the next few weeks, I will be weighing the many factors that must be considered in making such a decision. And I will make a declaration no later than the last part of January.
Mr. Eggers ran a fairly good race, all things considered, in the last election. Don't you feel that perhaps on this basis that he has laid the groundwork and he is known and could perhaps run a better race?
Well, this will be resolved a little later, I believe. Certainly, Paul Eggers ran a wonderful race, and I think he would be an asset to the party, but as you are well aware, Mr. Eggers has not announced yet.
being cared for in one of Dallas's major hospitals, such as here at Methodist, now cost an average of $5 to $6 a day more over the cost of the same care last year. Representatives of the 5 major Dallas hospitals made this joint announcement this morning. The reasons generally boil down to the same basic problems that plague the country. However, spokesman Glenn Scott of Methodist gave 3 specific causes.
The principal factor is an average 9% wage increase being given hospital employees, which is necessary to compete with salaries paid by Dallas business and industry and by other hospitals in the nation. We must do this if we are to continue to attract and keep the kind of employees needed to provide the best possible hospital care. Complicated new services and medical procedures which hospitals must implement to make new research discoveries available to patients also contribute to the cost increase, for they require additional equipment and additional skilled personnel. Finally, the costs hospitals must pay for supplies, materials, goods, and services continue to rise. The cost for hospital care is increasing over the nation, but the cost in Dallas is still well below that of many cities of comparable size. Our general hospitals are nonprofit institutions dependent on patient fees as their principal source of operating income. We believe our patients and the entire Dallas public want us to continue providing the very best patient care which can be given, administered only by the most skilled, qualified, concerned people. This we pledge to do.
Semi-private rooms, which cost before around $35 a day, more or less depending on the hospital, now cost $40 a day plus. These increased costs are going to be borne by the public, the patients themselves. Hospital administrators say this is because hospitals, unlike business or industry, have no way to increase production or sales. And in addition, the Dallas major hospitals are nonprofit institutions. The patients' fees, in most cases, are the major and sometimes sole source of operating funds. This is Teal Salon in Dallas for Channel 8 News.
The Tarrant County Sheriff's Office has filed charges of murder against 2 brothers today after a preliminary investigation into a brawl at a Southside Fort Worth tavern late last night. Charged are 25-year-old Lee Rodriguez Jr., who was found hiding under his house after the fight. Charged with him is his 23-year-old brother, Roberto Rodriguez. The charges resulted from the deaths of 2 persons, 24-year-old Gary Lynn Markham of Arlington and 46-year-old Paul Eugene Shorten of Fort Worth. According to the officers' reports, about 30 persons were inside the tavern when the fight broke out, apparently over a personal disagreement. The fight lasted more than a quarter hour and left the interior looking like a battlefield. When officers arrived at the scene, Markham was dead on the barroom floor. Shorten died after being taken to a Fort Worth hospital. Both the men had been stabbed numerous times. Another man, 29-year-old Raymond Alvarez, is near death with a gunshot wound in his chest. It might be noted here that a sign on the wall in taverns and stores that sell alcoholic beverages states the law against carrying guns on the premises. There is, however, no specific law against carrying a knife in those same places. In this case, the 2 dead men were stabbed to death with knives that are considered legal under existing state law. This is Gene Thomas, Channel 8 News in Fort Worth.
In retrospect, what did the 10-day odyssey called Operation Understanding accomplish? Well, by one measure, it was a failure. It did not result in the delivery of 26 tons of food, medical supplies, and clothing to the Americans being held prisoner in North Vietnam and Laos. But in several other ways, the 35,000-mile trip was a success. Operation Understanding did focus the world's gaze upon the plight of the 1,400 Americans being held by the communists, and incidentally, the hundreds of North Vietnamese being held in South Vietnam, the focusing of this attention has been one of the purposes of the trip, so in that way it certainly was successful. Another success of the journey can be identified as the way in which it brought new knowledge and understanding to Ross Perot himself. This was Ross Perot's first personal exposure to Southeast Asia, to the unbelievable poverty of the people who live there, and to their attitudes. He came away with a new feeling for the reasons why they think and act as they do. So, of course, a week or a few days is no complete course in Asian culture, but for a few days, Perot walked in Asian shoes, and it gave him a new measure of understanding which he will need as he pursues even further understandings with Asians in the future. Another way in which this venture was a success was the degree to which it placed North Vietnam and the Soviet Union later in the posture of having to do something about the prisoner of war problem, or be revealed as being inhumane. Perot acceded to every technical and procedural demand of the Communists, but they blocked his mission anyway. He made offers to wipe away every new objection they brought up, and their position remained intransigent. But as the trip came to an end, the North Vietnamese announced they will now permit American prisoners of war to receive a package from home every other month. This is a new loosening of restrictions which may be interpreted as a reaction to Perot's efforts, although Perot himself will probably not be heard taking credit for it. So despite the fact that the food, medicine, and clothing are now back in Dallas in a warehouse rather than in the prison camps around Hanoi, Operation Understanding was still a success, at least in the aspect of developing some understanding. This is Travis Lynn.
We got a phone call from a gentleman in New York City who felt very strongly about this issue and asked if he could have permission to mimeograph several thousand form letters expressing concern on the prisoner of war issue, which he was going to ensure were distributed in New York City. He was talking in terms of 10,000 letters for openers. And we got another call from a gentleman in Tucson, Arizona, requesting permission to reproduce our bumper sticker. He wanted to do 50,000 of them and get them all out in the Arizona area. We're getting calls in from Washington State, from Maine and Vermont, from Florida, from California. We're just going all over the country with this because this is an issue that truly has a common denominator. It's all we're asking people to do is write us a letter and express their concern for the 1,400 men that are held prisoner of war.
What you do is try to make every capsule exactly like every other one. With regard to its weight particularly, you don't want some dropping to the bottom and others rising to the top. You don't want little hooks sticking out of one so that it grabs onto another. You wouldn't want one to be smooth and another to be rough, and so on. About the same thing we do with playing cards. You don't want some to be sticky.
Or like bingo.
Or like bingo. Mm-hmm.
Does the size of the box that the capsules are put in, does that have anything to do with the way they will come to rest, piled on one on top of the other?
Well, it certainly would have a great deal to do with it. If you had very small capsules in a very large box, then a certain amount of juggling around would mix them together very well. If you had very large capsules in a small box, then a great deal of juggling wouldn't mix them up very well at all. The key thing here is how well the capsules are mixed. I saw some articles early in the game in which people asserted that the numbers just didn't look right in some way, and that's a legitimate test. They don't look right. A better test would be to ask what randomly selected dates should look like. And of course, that's the business of the professional statistician, the new statistician, who uses probability. The one I saw written up in the newspaper was done by saying, well, each month ought to have numbers corresponding to it that would average out to be about 183, because there are 365 days in the year, and this is half of that. What that means, well, perhaps you'd like to look at the board here where we made a little demonstration. Over here, we've portrayed the order of the draw. This means the first capsule to be drawn, and the second, and the third, and the fourth, and so on. And of course, the whole list would run down to 365. Over here, we put a code number indicating the date. This is the day of the year that has number 136 attached to it. I don't know what this would be. January would be the numbers from 1 to 31, for example. Now, in my sample, which I drew with the aid of a table of random numbers, which simply assures that each one has an equal chance of being drawn, the first one to be drawn was number 136, and the second to be drawn was number 219, and so on. Now, there's some interesting things that came out in mine. Several of the 260s and 250s were right close together, and yet this doesn't mean that we didn't have a random sample. Now, what you compute, though, to try to find out how well you did would be to match up the numbers here corresponding to 1 month, say January. Take the numbers in here from 1 to 31 and come over here and find out what number comes alongside them and see if these numbers average about the middle, 183. For example, this one would be, I guess that would be about December the 24th, and he has number 11. If you took all the numbers for December, those would run from 365 minus 31, whatever that is, up to 365. Isolate those, write down these numbers that come alongside them. These numbers then ought to average about 183, and that ought to happen for every month. And if that doesn't happen, then there is a symptom of something going wrong in the sampling process.
When the Fort Worth City Council meets in regular session tomorrow morning, it'll consider, among other things, the wage scale for workers at the regional airport. The meeting is expected to result in a confrontation between city officials and union leaders over the city's recommendation for wages to be paid. The director of the Public Works System for the city, Jack Graham, has suggested a minimum rate of $2 per hour for common laborers to a top scale of $3.75 per hour for foundation drill operators. The union leaders, O.R. Wright and Tom Upchurch, are apparently going to be at City Hall tomorrow to protest Graham's proposal. Wright says Graham's figures are between 15 cents and $2 an hour less than the same workers are now receiving at the work site. This argument is not new. It began December 19th when union leaders walked out of a hearing after Graham refused to listen to oral testimony. The union filed suit, but later dropped it when they were told that the labor records would be considered before a rate was set. O'Graham now says that after looking at those records and other union evidence, he still sees nothing to change his mind, and he plans to present his wage recommendations to the council tomorrow morning. What action the union might take if those rates are adopted has not been announced. So far, the union leaders have refrained from any threats of a strike. This is Gene Thomas, Channel 8 News in Fort Worth.
Not quite a year ago, the staff members of the Crossroads Community Center moved into these some half-dozen frame buildings fronting on Pennsylvania and began the actual work of planning the program and the construction of the future $2.5 million physical plant. The land for the new buildings is just about cleared. It encompasses a some 10.5-acre site extending all the way to Forest Avenue. Final plans for the construction hopefully will be approved by the end of this month. And again, hopefully, by the end of March, actual construction will begin. In the meantime, the center staff, under the direction of manager Frank Breedlove, are now going into the actual personal services that the center is designed for.
We now have our interagency project intake section, the medical and health component, 2 divisions of the community organization sponsored by the War on Poverty, and our manpower offices. In the future, sometime this month, we will have our Crossroads Daycare Center for about 50 children. 1 division of the State Department of Public Welfare will be on site with about 13 to 14 workers, and also the Code Enforcement Project, our Operation Can Do, will have their field office, Phase 2 field office here on site.
With several projects in the city of Dallas or all over the country that have been voted bond money at one time, and then it's been a couple of years at least from the voting to the building, there's been a problem of running short of money. Is Crossroads going to be in the position of not having enough money to do what it planned to do?
We are somewhat in that position, but I feel, as does the board feel, that the city of Dallas will provide the necessary funds to complete all 5 buildings and put together a fine program here.
Is there a danger of you being forgotten, though, in the midst of the auditorium and other projects?
No, I don't think it's a danger, because the type of services we are here to perform for the people. It's a relatively new concept, and it's a pilot project, and I think that we will take our place among the priority programs in the city.
The center is now in the crossroads of its own beginning, and perhaps ready to move forward. This is Teal Salon for Channel 8 News.
We've already made our projections, and in 1980, compared to 1970, we will know twice as much as we know today. Let me put this a different way. We've been in this world for what, 10,000 years of a civilized world, or maybe 20,000 years have had people around. The next 10 years will double all of the knowledge that we know. So it's going to be a year of learning in 1970 and all of the 70s, where we're going to learn more and we're going to accomplish more. It'll be a great, great era of progress.
Sir, what about the progress in education, sir? What can we look forward to?
Well, I hope in education that we concentrate more on the vocational field, because what's happened is that we've gone into all of these different fields, but as we're going into this expansion, we need to go more into vocational and technical training where people can have jobs that they've got the skill, they've got the technical ability to do it.
In Australia, the young people are more conscious of the Vietnam War being so much closer to Australia. There's a consciousness also that we were nearly invaded in World War II, and also that we are definitely part of Asia. Also, we have an American alliance. For the young people, most are prepared, if they are conscripted into the army, to fight in the war. But most realise, I think, as here, that this war, we've gone the wrong way in the war, let's say, and we should get over and done with as quickly as possible.
Is there more patriotism or more loyalty to your country over there than there is here? Or
well, it's a different kind of loyalty. Here I notice there's a lot more showing the flag, formality as far as patriotism goes. Back home, it's very much an informal type of patriotism.
Fresh from a unanimous defeat before the Fort Worth City Council this morning, Labor Attorney Tom Upchurch this afternoon at least had the satisfaction of seeing a substitute motion by Councilman Sheffy Cadane draw a few votes before the Dallas Council accepted proposed wage rates. Upchurch's argument in both Dallas and Fort Worth was that rates on the regional airport were not taken into consideration when Fort Worth Public Works Director Jack Graham recommended these rates for the next phase of construction. Upchurch said Graham went to other jobs where work was not comparable and used those jobs to prepare the recommendation. Cadane's substitute motion would have postponed the Dallas decision until next Monday, giving councilmen time to research the rates, but that motion was defeated, drawing only 3 votes. And Upchurch says that vote may mean possible labor trouble at the airport.
It's an unreal and a very impractical situation where you have men working currently on the airport doing precisely the same work that they will do under the second contract. And it would not be realistic to have the contractor who will perform the work under contract CO 3070, which is the drainage contract, to pay his people less money than men that they're going to be working right side by side with on this project. This isn't going to work in my judgment. That does not mean that labor will change or alter its policy of trying to be constructive in building this airport. As you know, we have come before the 2 city councils through the avenue of appeal, through the administrative hearings. We will continue this as we will go on to court now that we have not prevailed before the councils. But I do not believe that they took into consideration what is prevailing.
Minimum wages proposed today range from $1.75 an hour to $3.50 an hour. Upchurch says he doesn't know what's being paid at the airport now, but thinks it's substantially higher. This is Phil Reynolds, Channel 8 News at the Dallas City Council.
For the 1970s, it would be that we have available to everyone who can utilize it effectively 16 years of public school. That means 2 years of preschool and 2 years of post-high school education. And that if we could see that installed in every state, I think that our urging and our purpose in life would have been well realized.
For public education, an attempt to make some kind of equalization of opportunities in the school districts, aren't we going to have some new source of revenue?
This
Well, it'll either be a new source of revenue or we'll have to add to the present sources that we now have. And I don't know exactly which avenue of new taxes you might be thinking about, but I don't believe that here in Texas they're ready at this time for a state income tax. Let me comment on that in connection.